Have you ever fallen into such deep despair that you felt like giving up on everything? When it seems like the world around you is collapsing and there's no way out, if you're stuck in that dark place right now, this video might change the way you see things, because I'm going to share exactly what I do when I'm desperate, and it just might pull you out of the darkness today. When I find myself in moments of deep despair, the very first step I have learned to take is to allow myself to feel the emotions without judgment. It might sound simple, but in a society that often tells us to be strong, move on quickly, or don't let it get to you, giving myself permission to sit with my feelings is far from easy. Yet, it is also one of the most healing things I can do. Desperation is not just sadness, nor is it simply frustration. It is an overwhelming combination of helplessness, fatigue, fear, and a sense that no way forward exists. Denying that reality does not make it disappear. It only traps it deeper inside, building pressure until it erupts in destructive ways. So instead of running from it, I start by pausing. I take a breath and acknowledge, I feel desperate right now. I feel lost. I feel like I don't know what to do. Saying those words, even if only silently to myself, takes away some of the hidden power of despair. It is no longer a shadow looming unacknowledged in my mind. It becomes a defined experience that I can face. Just as naming a storm allows sailors to track and prepare for it, naming my despair gives me a clearer relationship with what I'm feeling. Sometimes, this acknowledgement comes through writing. I open a notebook and pour out every thought racing through my mind without trying to make it neat or logical. On the page, I confess everything: the anger, the hopelessness, the fear of failing, the shame of not being enough. As the ink flows, I notice that emotions lose some of their intensity. They shift from chaotic energy in my chest to words on paper that I can look at, read, and eventually understand. Other times, I speak aloud to myself, even if no one is around. Simply hearing my own voice admit, "I'm in pain right now," creates a sense of honesty and grounding. The act of allowing myself to feel is also about giving myself permission not to fix everything immediately. In moments of desperation, my instinct is to scramble for solutions, to fight harder against the tide of hopelessness. But paradoxically, that urgency often deepens the despair, because my frantic attempts to fix things prove how out of control I feel. By pausing and simply acknowledging, "Yes, this is where I am," I step out of the exhausting cycle of resistance. I realize that it is okay not to have all the answers right now. It is okay just to exist with the weight of the feeling for a moment. There are days when I cry, real heavy tears that seem endless. In the past, I might have told myself to stop, to hold it together, but now I understand that crying is not weakness, it is release. Each tear carries away a fragment of the pain, making room for me to breathe again. Other times I feel anger bubbling inside, and I let myself express it safely, through journaling, through hitting a pillow, or even through loud music and movement. Desperation bottled up is destructive, but desperation expressed honestly can transform into clarity. Allowing myself to feel is also about listening. When I sit quietly with my emotions, I start to notice what they are trying to tell me. Desperation often points to unmet needs: the need for rest, the need for connection, the need for reassurance that my life still has meaning. It can reveal areas where I have been pushing myself too hard, ignoring my limits, or living according to unrealistic expectations. By acknowledging the despair, I open a conversation with myself. What is this feeling showing me about what I truly need right now? Sometimes that answer is surprising. I may discover that my desperation isn't just about one problem, but about accumulated stress and exhaustion. Other times it highlights that I've been carrying responsibilities that are not mine to carry. This listening process doesn't make the despair vanish instantly, but it shifts it from a terrifying fog into a teacher, however uncomfortable. Another important aspect of acknowledging my emotions is practicing self-compassion. It is easy to criticize myself in these moments. Why am I so weak? Why can't I handle this better? Other people would manage fine. But beating myself up only deepens the hopelessness. Instead, I remind myself that being human means facing seasons of despair. No one is immune. Even the strongest, most successful people have nights when they feel broken inside. By telling myself, "It's okay to feel this way. You're not alone. This will not last forever," I give myself the same kindness I would offer a close friend. In practical terms, allowing myself to feel may look like taking a day off when everything feels overwhelming. It may look like sitting quietly by the window, staring at the rain, and simply letting the sadness flow. It may look like whispering prayers into the silence, not asking for answers, but just surrendering my honesty. This act of embracing my emotions doesn't solve the external problems immediately, but it lays the foundation for healing. Without acknowledgement, no solution can truly take root. With acknowledgement, even the heaviest despair becomes a little lighter, because I am no longer fighting against myself. It is important to note that allowing myself to feel doesn't mean drowning endlessly in despair. There is a balance, giving space to emotions without letting them consume me. The difference lies in intention. When I sit with my despair intentionally, through journaling, reflection, or quiet acceptance, it becomes a process of release. When I resist or deny it, it lingers like a shadow that grows darker with time. The courage to face my feelings head-on is what prevents them from controlling me from the shadows. I often remind myself of this truth. Emotions are like waves. They rise, they peak, and eventually they fall. When I allow myself to stand in the wave without panicking, I realize it will not drown me forever. Desperation too has a rhythm. It may feel unbearable in the moment, but if I can breathe and acknowledge it, I will eventually see it recede. This awareness is empowering. It tells me that even my deepest despair is temporary, and by facing it, I strengthen my capacity to endure and grow. So, the very first thing I do when I feel desperate is not to run from it, not to bury it under distractions or force myself to stay positive. Instead, I grant myself the permission to be human, to feel fully, to cry if needed, to rage if needed, to confess the pain without shame. This honesty with myself creates a doorway to healing. By acknowledging the storm, I learn that while I cannot always control the weather of my emotions, I can choose how I will stand in the rain. And in that choice lies the first step out of despair. When the weight of despair presses down on me and I feel like nothing makes sense anymore, the thought of changing everything all at once feels impossible. In those moments, I've discovered the power of small anchors, simple, deliberate actions that seem almost insignificant, but carry the ability to stabilize me when everything else feels like it's slipping away. Finding these small points of grounding is how I begin to pull myself out of hopelessness, one step at a time. I used to believe that if I was desperate, the only way forward was to find a huge, life-changing solution. I thought I needed to overhaul my job, fix all my problems at once, or achieve something grand to feel better. But trying to take giant leaps while drowning in despair only made me sink further. I felt paralyzed, trapped in a cycle of pressure and failure. Then, through trial and error, I realized that hope often begins with something very small. Something that does not solve everything instantly, but gives me just enough stability to take another breath, another step. Sometimes that anchor is as simple as cleaning a small corner of my room. At first it feels pointless. How can tidying a desk matter when my whole life feels like it's falling apart? But the moment I put one thing in order, I notice a shift. My mind feels a little less chaotic because my environment reflects a bit of order. That tiny act reminds me that I still have influence, that I can still shape something, even if it's just the arrangement of books or clothes. And with that realization, a flicker of control returns. Other times, the anchor is physical movement. When despair makes me heavy, I force myself to move, even if it's only stretching for 5 minutes or walking around the block. My body resists because my emotions want me to stay curled up, but I've learned that movement changes chemistry. A short walk in the sunlight, feeling the air on my skin, listening to birds or traffic, reconnects me to the world outside my thoughts. It doesn't erase my problems, but it reminds me that life still flows, and I am part of it. Music is another anchor I rely on. There are songs that hold pieces of my hope, melodies that remind me of better times, or inspire me with courage. When I put in my earphones and let those sounds fill me, I feel lifted. The lyrics or rhythms act like ropes pulling me out of the pit, even if just for a little while. In that space, I breathe differently. My heart remembers joy, and my mind begins to imagine possibilities beyond despair. Anchors can also come from rituals. For example, making myself a cup of tea or coffee, sitting down, and drinking it slowly while focusing only on that act. It's ordinary, almost trivial, but that moment of mindfulness interrupts the spiral of hopelessness. It tells me you are still here. You can still create small moments of calm. These rituals are not about distraction, but about grounding myself in the present. When I'm desperate, my mind races toward the future with fear, or toward the past with regret. Anchors bring me back to now, and in now, the despair feels less infinite. There are times when writing becomes the anchor. I may not journal deeply, but I write just one sentence about how I feel. Sometimes that sentence is raw. I hate this day. Sometimes it's weary. I don't think I can keep going. But getting it out of my head and onto paper gives the feeling a boundary. It is no longer swirling endlessly in my chest. It exists in ink where I can see it, touch it, and even walk away from it. And when I read those words later, I notice how my feelings shift over time. That awareness itself becomes a lifeline. Anchors don't always need to be actions. They can also be memories or words. When despair clouds my thoughts, I recall a time in the past when I felt hopeless, but eventually came through. I remind myself, you have been here before, and you survived. You found light again then, and you will again now. That memory is proof that despair is not permanent. Or I repeat a phrase like a mantra, this moment will pass. The repetition soothes me, just as waves against a shore eventually calm the water. The beauty of small anchors is that they bypass the overwhelming need to fix everything. They ask only for something tiny. Stand up, take a breath, drink water, send one message to a friend, look out the window, listen to one song. And yet these small things accumulate. Like stones placed carefully in a river, they form a path across. Alone, each stone seems small, but together, they create stability strong enough to carry me forward. What makes these anchors powerful is not their size, but their symbolism. When I take a small positive action in despair, I am telling myself, I still care about life. I still choose to try, even if it's in the smallest way possible. That choice is defiance against hopelessness. Despair wants me to believe nothing matters, but each anchor proves that something does. That proof, repeated day after day, begins to shift the story I tell myself. It's also important to notice that different anchors work at different times. There are days when cleaning helps, and days when I need music, and days when all I can do is breathe slowly and survive. The point is not perfection, but consistency. Reminding myself that there are always little things within reach to keep me afloat. By experimenting and noticing what helps me most, I build a toolkit of anchors ready for when despair strikes. In the bigger picture, these anchors create momentum. One small act leads to another, and slowly I regain the strength to face larger challenges.
Despair thrives in paralysis, but small anchors create motion.
Even if it's tiny, motion breaks the stillness of hopelessness. It's like striking a single match in a dark room. The flame may not illuminate everything, but it's enough to remind me that light exists. From that flame, I can kindle more. So when I ask myself what to do when I feel desperate, one of the best answers is simple. I find a small anchor. I look for one thing, anything that can give me a sense of grounding. Whether it's moving my body, cleaning a space, drinking a cup of tea, listening to music, or writing one sentence, these little acts keep me tethered to hope. They are not the full solution, but they are the bridge that carries me from despair toward healing. And in that bridge, step by step, I learn that survival is not about conquering everything at once. It's about choosing one small anchor at a time until the storm begins to calm. When despair grips me, one of the hardest instincts to resist is isolation. My first reaction is often to withdraw, to shut down, and to convince myself that no one else could possibly understand what I am going through. The temptation to hide my pain behind silence feels overwhelming, as though speaking it aloud would make it more real, or worse, burden someone I care about. Yet, I have discovered over time that isolation only feeds despair, allowing it to grow unchecked in the quiet corners of my mind. The moment I choose to share my struggles with someone I trust, the weight begins to lighten. It doesn't vanish, but suddenly I no longer carry it alone. Sharing does not require me to present my feelings in perfect words. Sometimes all I manage to say is, "I'm not okay right now." Other times my voice trembles as I try to describe what feels indescribable. And yet every time I let those words escape into the air, something shifts. The act of speaking makes the pain less abstract, less like an invisible monster lurking in the shadows. It becomes something outside of me that I can look at, examine, and begin to understand. And when another person listens, truly listens, it affirms that my feelings are valid, that I am not foolish or weak for experiencing them. There is incredible strength in simply being heard. I remember conversations where I poured out my heart, expecting judgment, only to be met with quiet nods and words like, "I hear you," or "That sounds really hard." Those responses did not fix my problems, but they reminded me that my existence mattered, that someone cared enough to hold space for my pain. In that space, I began to feel less alone. Despair thrives on the belief that we are isolated, that no one could possibly understand. But when someone listens with empathy, that illusion breaks, and connection replaces loneliness. Sometimes the support I seek comes not in the form of answers, but presence. A friend sitting beside me in silence, a family member sending a short message just to check in, a mentor reminding me gently that struggles do not define my worth. These small gestures create lifelines. They remind me that while my inner world may feel shattered, I am still part of a larger web of care and connection. That awareness itself becomes a counterforce against hopelessness. It took me a long time to learn that reaching out for support is not a sign of weakness. I used to think that if I admitted my despair, I would look fragile or incapable. But I've come to realize that seeking support is actually an act of courage. It requires vulnerability, the willingness to be seen in my most raw, unguarded state. And vulnerability, rather than being weakness, is the birthplace of genuine human connection. By letting others see my pain, I give them the chance to meet me with compassion. And in that exchange, both of us grow stronger. There are times when friends and family may not fully understand, and that is okay. In those cases, I turn to professionals, therapists, counselors, or mentors trained to hold space without judgment. Speaking with them provides perspective I cannot always find on my own. They help me untangle the knots of despair, see patterns I had missed, and remind me of tools I can use to cope. Knowing that I don't have to navigate everything alone, that there are people equipped to walk with me through the storm, is deeply reassuring. Even beyond direct conversations, I find support in communities. Online forums, support groups, or gatherings where people share similar struggles create a sense of solidarity. Hearing someone else say, "I've been there too," makes my own despair feel less isolating. It shifts the narrative from "why me" to "we are human and we all carry burdens." That sense of collective experience reduces shame, replacing it with shared strength. Of course, reaching out is not always easy. In the depths of despair, my mind often whispers lies. "No one cares. You'll just be a burden. They won't understand." Overcoming those voices requires intentional effort. Sometimes I begin with the smallest step, sending a text like, "Can we talk?" or "I'm struggling today." Other times, I rehearse what I want to say before making the call. And every time I push through the hesitation, I am reminded that most people respond with far more kindness than my despair had led me to expect. Sharing also brings accountability. When I voice my pain to someone else, it breaks the cycle of secrecy. I am less likely to spiral inward because now another person knows, and their gentle check-ins or encouragement keep me tethered to hope. Even if nothing else changes immediately, that thread of accountability helps me hold on. Support also flows both ways. In opening up about my struggles, I have often discovered that the people around me carry their own hidden battles. My honesty gives them permission to share too. In those conversations, we become mirrors for one another, reminding each other that suffering does not make us broken. It makes us human. That shared humanity transforms despair into connection, and connection is one of the most powerful antidotes to hopelessness. It is important to acknowledge that not every attempt to share will feel successful. There may be times when someone responds awkwardly or doesn't understand, or even dismisses my feelings. Those moments sting, but they do not erase the value of reaching out. They remind me to choose carefully who I confide in, to seek out those with empathy and wisdom. And when I find the right people, the support they provide becomes a lifeline stronger than any solitary effort I could make. Ultimately, seeking support is about reminding myself that I am not designed to carry everything alone. Humans are wired for connection, for community, for shared strength. When I feel desperate, my instinct to isolate may tell me otherwise, but I now know that salvation often lies in the courage to reach out. Whether it's a whispered confession to a friend, a conversation with a counselor, or a simple message asking for company, that step transforms despair from a solitary burden into a shared journey. And in that journey, I find light, even if faint, shining again. Desperation often has a root, unmet expectations. When I think back to the times I felt most hopeless, I realize those moments came when my goals collided violently with reality. I had plans that felt urgent, dreams that seemed essential, standards I believed I had to meet. And when things didn't unfold as I imagined, the gap between expectation and reality opened into a dark chasm. That gap whispered lies. You're not enough. You'll never make it. Everything you've worked for is wasted. In those moments, I learned that one of the most important steps I can take is to pause, reset my goals, and restructure the way I think about the situation. Resetting goals does not mean abandoning ambition or settling for less. It means reassessing what is realistic right now, given my current circumstances, energy, and resources. Desperation thrives when I measure myself against impossible standards. By adjusting those standards to something achievable, I begin to replace despair with direction. Instead of staring at a mountain I cannot climb, I create smaller hills that I can tackle step by step. This process begins with honesty. I ask myself, what am I demanding of myself that is beyond my current capacity? Maybe I've set a deadline that requires superhuman effort, or I've expected myself to handle emotional challenges while ignoring my need for rest. When I admit that my goals might be unrealistic, I feel a twinge of shame, as though I've failed. But then I remind myself, adjusting my goals is not failure, it's wisdom. Even the strongest athletes rest between races. Even the most successful leaders reassess when circumstances change. Resetting is not giving up, it's creating space to move forward sustainably. Once I've identified the goals causing pressure, I break them into smaller pieces. For example, instead of demanding that I fix my entire life in a week, I choose one area, like improving my sleep schedule, reconnecting with a friend, or completing one small project at work. I write that single goal down, make it measurable, and focus on that alone. The sense of progress that comes from achieving even one small goal builds momentum. Suddenly, I no longer feel stuck in quicksand. I feel like I'm moving, however slowly, towards solid ground. Restructuring my thinking is just as important as resetting goals. When I am desperate, my thoughts spiral into extremes. This is the end. Nothing will ever improve. I always fail. These absolutes amplify hopelessness. To counter them, I consciously challenge those thoughts. I ask myself, is it really true that nothing will ever improve? Haven't there been times in the past when things got better? That shift from absolute to balanced thinking creates space for hope. Instead of believing always or never, I begin to say, this is hard right now, but it doesn't mean it will stay this way forever. One powerful tool I use is reframing. Instead of labeling a setback as total failure, I ask, what is this teaching me? How might this challenge prepare me for something in the future? Reframing doesn't minimize the pain, but it changes how I interpret it. For example, losing an opportunity might feel devastating in the moment, but when I reframe it, I might see it as a chance to explore a new path I wouldn't have considered otherwise. This mindset transforms despair from a dead end into a detour. Difficult, yes, but not the end of the journey. I also remind myself of the importance of patience. In desperation, my mind craves immediate solutions. I want relief now, success now, clarity now. But life rarely operates on such urgent timelines. By resetting my expectations around time, by telling myself progress may take weeks or months, and that's okay, I reduce the crushing pressure. Patience becomes a form of compassion, giving myself permission to heal, grow, and rebuild at a human pace. Another practice that helps me restructure my thoughts is gratitude. When I am desperate, my focus narrows onto what's missing or broken. Gratitude widens my perspective. Even listing 3 simple things, a warm meal, a message from a friend, a moment of laughter, reminds me that not everything is hopeless. Gratitude doesn't erase problems, but it interrupts despair's dominance over my attention. It reminds me that beauty and goodness coexist with struggle. Writing out my restructured goals is another anchor. I create a list that separates what is within my control from what isn't. I may not be able to control the outcome of a situation, but I can control my effort, my routines, and the way I respond. For instance, I can't control whether someone else accepts me, but I can control how I practice self-care. I can't control global circumstances, but I can control how much news I consume. Focusing on what I can control gives me back a sense of agency. It shrinks the overwhelming chaos of despair into something manageable. At times, restructuring my thinking requires external input. Talking to someone I trust often helps me see blind spots. They might point out strengths I've overlooked, progress I've made, or alternative perspectives I couldn't see while consumed by despair. In this way, support and restructuring go hand in hand. I reset my internal narrative not just by sheer willpower, but also by receiving reminders from people who believe in me when I forget to believe in myself. Of course, resetting goals and restructuring thoughts is not a one-time event. Despair has a way of creeping back, whispering its lies again and again. That's why I treat this process as ongoing. Each morning I ask, what is one realistic goal I can pursue today? Each night I reflect, which thoughts today helped me move forward and which ones dragged me down? Slowly, these daily resets reshape my mindset. The more I practice, the more natural it becomes to respond to despair with adjustment instead of surrender. Ultimately, resetting goals and restructuring thinking is about reclaiming hope. Despair tells me I'm powerless, but the act of re-evaluating and reframing proves the opposite. I still have choices. I may not control every circumstance, but I can always adjust how I approach it. That realization turns desperation into opportunity. An opportunity to grow more flexible, more resilient, and more compassionate with myself. By releasing impossible expectations and embracing realistic step-by-step progress, I create a path forward. And with each step, however small, despair loses its grip. When desperation takes hold, my first instinct is often to fight against it mentally, to search frantically for solutions or push myself harder to find a way out. But I have learned through experience that no amount of mental effort can sustain me if my body and spirit are completely drained. Desperation is not only a psychological struggle, it is also a physical and spiritual one. My body holds tension, my breathing becomes shallow, my sleep is disrupted, and my energy levels plummet. In those moments, the most powerful thing I can do is pause and take deliberate care of both body and mind, because only when I'm nourished can I begin to face the challenges before me. The simplest act of care is rest. When despair's loud, I often lie awake at night, replaying my failures or imagining worst-case scenarios. Lack of sleep magnifies everything, making problems feel 10 times larger than they are. That is why I treat rest as medicine. I create a routine that signals safety to my body, dimming lights before bed, avoiding endless scrolling on my phone, and listening to calming sounds or practicing deep breathing. On nights when sleep still refuses to come, I remind myself that even lying still, allowing my body to relax, is restorative. By prioritizing sleep, I gift myself the clarity and resilience that exhaustion steals away. Alongside rest, nutrition plays a role I cannot ignore. In despair, my appetite disappears or I reach for comfort foods that only leave me sluggish. But I've realized that my body is the engine carrying me through these storms, fueling it with simple, nourishing meals. Fruits, vegetables, protein, water provides stability. Eating mindfully, even if it's just one balanced meal a day during a hard time, reminds me that I am worth caring for. It is not about perfection, but consistency, sending my body the message, you deserve to be cared for, even now. Movement is another key part of healing. Desperation tells me to curl up and withdraw, but when I let my body stagnate, my emotions stagnate too. Moving doesn't mean forcing myself into intense workouts when I feel broken. It can be as gentle as stretching my arms, walking slowly in nature, or practicing yoga poses that open up the chest and lungs. Each movement releases tension stored in muscles and reintroduces flow into a body that feels heavy. When I walk outside, the sunlight and air remind me that the world is larger than my despair, that life continues, and that I am still a part of it. Breath is another anchor. In moments of panic, I forget to breathe fully, leaving me lightheaded and anxious. By practicing intentional breathing, slow inhales through the nose, holding gently, and exhaling slowly, I send signals of safety to my nervous system. These breaths create space between me and the chaos in my mind. They whisper to my body, "You are safe right now. You can let go." Sometimes, just 5 minutes of deep breathing is enough to soften the sharp edges of hopelessness and allow me to think more clearly. Alongside physical care, nurturing my spirit is essential. For some, this may mean prayer, meditation, or connecting with nature. For me, these practices remind me of something bigger than myself, something steady and constant. when my inner world feels unstable. Sitting quietly in meditation, I let thoughts rise and fall without clinging to them. In prayer, I surrender what I cannot control, allowing faith to carry what my shoulders cannot. In nature, I observe cycles of growth and renewal. The way trees shed leaves but bloom again. The way rivers keep moving despite obstacles. These practices don't erase despair, but they give me perspective. Life is bigger and seasons change. Journaling can also become a form of spiritual care. Beyond recording my pain, I use it as a space to practice gratitude and affirmations, writing down even one or two things I am thankful for. A kind word from a friend, the comfort of a blanket, the taste of warm tea, shifts my focus. Gratitude doesn't deny the reality of despair, but it gently reminds me that not everything is broken. Affirmations too help rewrite the harsh scripts in my mind. When despair says, "You are worthless," I counter with words like, "I am doing my best. I am worthy of love and care." These statements may feel fragile at first, but repeated consistently, they plant seeds of hope. It's important to note that caring for body and mind during despair is not indulgence, it is survival. In times when I feel guilty for resting or taking time for myself, I remind myself that self-care is not selfish. It is preparation. Just as a wounded soldier must tend to injuries before returning to battle, I must tend to myself if I want to keep moving forward. Ignoring my needs only deepens despair. Meeting them slowly rebuilds the foundation on which hope can grow. There are days when the most compassionate thing I can do is to scale back and focus only on the basics. Eat something, drink water, shower, breathe, and rest. These small acts are not meaningless. They are declarations of resilience. They say, "Even in my darkest moment, I will choose life." And each time I choose to care for myself, even imperfectly, I create a little more space for light to return. Community can also play a role in this care. Sharing a meal with a friend, attending a yoga class, or simply sitting with others in silence can bring a sense of belonging. Taking care of myself doesn't have to be a solitary act. Sometimes it is about letting others care for me when I don't have the strength. Accepting that care requires humility, but it also reinforces the truth that I am not alone. Ultimately, caring for my body and mind during despair is about planting seeds of renewal. I may not feel immediate joy or relief, but I trust the process. Just as a garden needs water and sunlight even when growth is invisible, I need rest, nourishment, and spiritual grounding even when I still feel broken. Over time, those seeds sprout. My body grows stronger, my mind steadier, my spirit more resilient. And slowly, I discover that what once felt like the end is simply a passage. A season that, with care, will give way to something new. If this message resonates with you, leave a comment below. What have you done when you felt desperate? I truly want to hear your story. And don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because the next video might be exactly what you need in the hardest moment of your life.